In 1880, an entrepreneur, George Pullman, created a railroad company called the Pullman Car Company. During a railroad boom in America, George Pullman created his own city called Pullmantown. The town was designed to house the workers of the company and sustain a society. However, having your own town meant money was a necessity. Unexpected cuts, long hours of work, and debt was inevitable. Within the city, a socialist newspaper in the city claims he wasn't a man to let you pay for free, in relation to how the clergy was expected to pay rent for churches. Circumstances and a bad environment caused groups which became the American Railroad Union to form. This union was founded in Chicago, June 20th, 1893. The central office had 9 members that made policies for the betterment of the lives of the workers. The leader of this union was Eugene B. Debs, whom would later play a big role in the strike that would later occur. In 1893, America suffered a historical depression known as the Panic of 1893. Similar to the Panic of 1873, 20 years behind this panic was marked by the collapse of a railroad overbuilding and a shaky railroad financing, which set off a series of bank failures. At the time, many companies were trying to take over their competition, making it very risky for their financial stability. Being a railroad company, Pullman had to make serious decisions to make and plan out his moves accordingly. When his company laid off workers and lowered wages, it did not reduce rents, which were still at unreasonably high price, which the workers could not afford, resulting in plans for a strike. Since workers felt they had no democratic vote, they began to feel oppressed by their lack of available resources and decided to form the American Railroad Union, or the ARU, formed in 1893 by Eugene B. Debs. The American Railroad Union focused on the betterment of the conditions in which workers were living in, although there were some railroad workers that could not join the union due to certain conditions, such as needing the money and not objecting to rules due to the fact that things could go horribly wrong, and the workers that weren't a part of the union began to send letters to the government and receive help from outside forces such as the federal government. In 1893, because of the Depression, factory wages at the company fell about 25%, but the rents George Pullman charged did not decrease. If a Pullman worker was in debt, he was charged off his paycheck, meaning that at times workers could have negative amounts of money. Many of the workers, driven by desperation, joined the American Railroad Union. When a grievance committee of workers attempted to meet with Pullman, he just fired them and didn't care to listen to any of their sides or stories. He did not care about the conditions in which they were living, and he did not care about their debts. The strike affected hundreds of towns and cities across the country. Railroad workers were divided for the old established brotherhoods, which included the skilled workers such as engineers, firemen, and conductors who did not support labor action. Billings remained quiet, but on July 10th, soldiers reached Lockwood, Montana, a small rail center where the troops trained, surrounded by hundreds of angry strikers. Narrowly averting violence, the Army opened the lines through Montana. When the strike ended, the railroads fired and blacklisted all the employees who had supported it. So the strikers sent a letter to the government of Illinois for help in the circumstances they were in. In response, the governor, John P. Alleged, sent a letter to George Pullman himself. As a result, Pullman did nothing to change. He did not even really acknowledge the letters and chose not to take them into consideration. The strike was a nationwide railroad strike in the U.S. May 11, 1894. It put in opposition the American Railroad Union against the Pullman factory, the main railroads, and the federal government of the United States under President Grover Cleveland. The strike and boycott shut down much of the nation's freight and passenger traffic west of Detroit, Michigan. It all began in Chicago on May 11th when nearly 4,000 factory employees of the Pullman Company began a wildcat strike. in response to recent reductions in wages. During the Depression, the Pullman Palace Car Company cut wages as demand for new passenger cars plummeted and the company's revenue dropped. A delegation of workers complained that wages had been cut, but not rent at their company housing or other costs in the company town. The company's owner, George Pullman, refused to lower rents or go to arbitration. President Grover Cleveland, the U.S. Attorney General Rich Olney dealt with the strike, only had a railroad attorney that still received $10,000 retained from the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, in comparison to his $8,000 salary as Attorney General. Olney obtained an injunction in federal court barring union leaders from supporting the strike and demanding that the strikers cease their activities or face being fired. Debs and other leaders of the ARU ignored the injunction, and federal troops were called up to enforce it. While Debs had been reluctant to start the strike, he threw his energies into organizing it. He called a general strike of all union members in Chicago, and this was opposed by Samuel Groper's head of the AFL and other established unions, and it failed. City by city, the federal forces broke the ARU efforts to shut down the national transportation system. Thousands U.S. Marshals and some U.S. troops commanded by Brigadier General Nelson Miles took action. During the course of the strike, 30 strikers were killed and 50 wounded. Property damage exceeded $80 million. Debs was arrested on federal charges including conspiracy to obstruct the mail as well as disobeying an order directed to him by the Supreme Court to stop the destruction of railroadways and to dissolve the boycott. He was defended by Clarence Darrow, a prominent attorney, as well as Lyman Trumbull. At the conspiracy trial, Darrow argued that it was the railroads, not Debs and his union, that met in secret conspired against their opponents. Sensing that Debs would be acquitted, the prosecution dropped the charge when a juror took ill. Although Darrow also represented Debs at the Union Supreme Court for violating the federal injunction, Debs was sentenced to 6 months in prison. The United States was affected by the Pullman strike in the way that all railroads were used by everyone in a commute manner. When the workers decided that they would be going on strike, it not only affected them and their income, but every other company that was relying on railroad carts for goods and other important items from all over the country. The Pullman Company sent railroad carts all over the country, which was affected when the carts weren't moving due to the fact that they relied heavily on them. When the Pullman workers ceased to cooperate with the company and withdrew from their work responsibilities, many others whom were dependent on the carts began to realize that the workers had decided that they could no longer tolerate the working conditions they had been enduring for so long. Within days after the Pullman workers ceased doing their jobs and began to riot and attack public buildings, outside forces arrived and attempted to control the outbursts that had previously led so much destructions. In order for workers to return from their daily routines, they seek a compromise of stability, better working conditions, and wages. Eventually, Labor Day became a national holiday in memory of the events that had previously taken place in Chicago, Illinois.